everybody, welcome back to Bombshell. This weekend, oh my freaking fucking god, I ended up being pretty unwell, so I missed quite a few of the games that were being played this weekend, and not only that, I then ended up taking the entire day off yesterday because I woke up, I felt so just gross and exhausted. I just slept the entire day. It was not a fun time, but, you know, I've had a chance to kind of collate my thoughts now, and we can actually have a discussion about esports where I don't look like I've been hit by a train, so that... a plus there. Comes as no surprise to anyone, I should imagine, that this week what I want to be talking about is the meta changes, and we've now had a chance to see how they're going to affect the landscape in North America. EU currently still playing on the previous patch, a lot of that being to do with a lot of the disruption that EMEA has had because of the ongoing war. But in North America, we have actually been able to see it, and I was really excited to see what was going to happen with this patch. Whenever people ask my opinion as to what I thought was going to happen, the only thing I could really say to people was I think that there will be some teams that don't adopt it straight away, and there will be some teams that do. And a lot of the reason being, you know, I remember back at the very start of Stage 3 in EMEA when I was casting it last year, and when Astra was actually first really like making her waves in the meta, there were a lot of players who still held on to Omen for quite a long time, despite the fact that at the time it was so clear that Astra was a superior agent and could do so much more. And I remember at the time we would be like casting games and I would just be getting like pissed off with teams, and I'd just be like, why are they clinging to the Omen dream? Like, Omen is dead. Well, now we're on the other side of that fence because Omen is fucking here to play. Astra may be dead, unless you're like a couple of teams who, you know, they'll learn to let go. So I wanted to just have a look at some of the specific games that I got to see where we saw some differences. So the first game that like really made a splash this weekend, and actually it was the first game of the weekend, was Cloud9 versus the Guard. I actually missed this game live. I had to go back and I managed to watch one of the maps today. So that was for me, it was the last one that I saw, but I think it was a game where we did actually see some really clear differences in this Astra versus Omen sort of fight that's going on right now. The map that I watched was Ascent. That was the second map that was played in that series. And they actually played the same composition as each other than the controller. So on the side of the Guard, they stuck to the Astra. That's where Valen was playing. Vanity, surprise to nobody, went back to Omen, which is an agent that people will remember him playing and that he's historically been very good on. I think that the options for speed, interestingly, were a really big thing that I noticed in this game. When we're talking about Cloud9 being on the attack, there were so many like faster options for adaptation and on-the-fly decisions that were available for Cloud9 because of the speed with which they could put the dark covers out without really having to like future-proof them. I think that's the thing with Astra at the moment, is like you really do have to future-proof because of the massive increase in the cooldown on the stars. It means that actually if you change your mind, you put stars down where you don't want them to be, a significant portion of the round is going to be lost to you being able to use them in the future. So that's definitely something that I noticed. So when we're looking at things like A pushes for Cloud9, you know, being able to just straight up cut off Garden once the rest of the team have control of mid, once they decided they're going to push in through tree, great, we cut off Garden, we have the route in, I've been lurking A fucking main this whole time, we can do that. Not only that, but really good options for them to be able to cut off Heaven. Heaven is like such a key place on the A site on fucking Ascent. I nearly said on Valorant. The A site on Valorant is like just a really key part of the game. Yeah, the A site on Ascent, cutting off Heaven, especially if you've already made your engage into the site, you want to be making a plant, or you're holding a post plant. Teams that are succeeding are going to be the ones that can consistently keep that space controlled. And the Omen had so many more options to be able to do that. And especially when you're combining that with things like the Killjoy Mollies, for example, or a KO fragment, all of those things together gave C9 very fluid control of the site space that they were trying to take. And actually, it means that when we see, and this was not something that I just noticed in this game, but I think with Astras in general right now, when we see them trying to take space on a site, usually in a post-plant situation, rather than getting them, like cutting off lines of sight through choke points, for example, you are more likely to see them actually use their smoke in the middle of the site. Now, obviously, the smokes are a little bit bigger for an Astra right now, so there is more space, or sorry, less space to play around with that, and that's kind of the point. But being able to just dedicate one to the center of the site to be able to cut off certain angles and use that as a pivot point around which to play, something that we've seen, for example, Cyphers do for some time in Valorant when they use their cages in the center of a site to play around. I'm specifically thinking like Haven A site as a decent example of that. And it also means that, you know, they only need to invest one into that, you know, like that aim, that endeavor. They don't have to worry about having more than one nebula available to them. There's also like the fact that in post plants, and I'm not specifically stating whether I mean on attack or defense here, because in a lot of cases these can apply to both sides, you don't really have things like gravity wells available to them. I mean, using the Ascent A site as an example, it's really not uncommon up until this point to see gravity wells be one of the pieces of utility that are invested into controlling the heaven space. I don't think I saw a single gravity well in it, or at least be used for that purpose in this game between C9 and the guard. So I think that feeling of the Astral utility being way more precious and sparse was very palpable in this game. And oftentimes you would see those initial stars be used to kind of cut off the main entrances. So if we're thinking about them on the attack, you know, put one in B main, maybe two in B main entrance, have one on Arch in A main entrance, and then that's kind of what it is you work with. You don't have the freedom to willy-nilly just be placing them around. And that means that your site control later on in the round, if you actually manage to get a plant, or if the attackers come in and you're defending and they get a plant, is way more limited. And that's a very tough thing with Astra. Looking to the 100 Thieves versus Evil Geniuses game, this was the first game of the weekend that I saw, and I thought it was a game. It was certainly a game. 100 Thieves. So the big thing with this game is that it really gave the impression of like, okay, we don't have much site control, so let's just throw everything. Like, this was the flash game. This was all about flashes, and it wasn't until we actually started to see some more games be played in the weekend that I think I got more of an impression that, no, you can still play in a more controlled manner. It doesn't have to be, like, literally throw your entire fucking toolkit at the enemy and hope that something lands and that you can get an opening, because I think that's how it really felt in that 100 Thieves game. Interestingly, we saw, you know, them playing on Breeze as their first map, and naturally, I think many people expected Viper to still be played quite a bit on Breeze. She was played on Breeze, and you didn't really feel that much of a difference, in my opinion anyway. The reason that Viper would be expected to still be played on Breeze is because there are such long sightlines on that map. You need something to cut them off. Like, there just isn't an alternative. You can't really just play Breeze and be like, guess we won't have a wall, because Breeze ain't gonna work for you that way. So it was really on Haven that I noticed another kind of big thing that I'm sort of taking away from this weekend, and that is these two teams ran mirror compositions, except 100 Thieves played Omen and Evil Geniuses played Brimstone. Now, Brim is obviously another one of these controllers who has received a buff in this patch, and a lot of people have been talking about him and how viable he may be. In this instance, I think the choice to bring Brim was the wrong one. And this was something that I spoke about on my stream when I was co-streaming this game, is Brim is gonna give you great, like, micro control. Like, if you're just taking a fight, having something like the stim is going to give you a really, really good advantage. But on a map like Haven that's very big, very hard to control, especially on the defensive side, as it is, because there's so much space on it, having someone like Brim is not going to help you get overall map control. And that's what's really good with Astra, is that kind of global feeling of her. Now, neither Brim nor Omen really have the same like feel of globality as Astra does, but Omen has some. You know, he has some. The way you can use your paranoia covers like a decent distance, and crucially the way that his teleports work. And I know everyone sees that as a ranked play, but it was something that JC Sani did successfully in that game, teleported over to the A site to get a plant. You love to see it, but honestly, I think that things like that do give Omen a sort of advantage over Brimstone, at least on a map like Haven. It was also very clear that Stani was very comfortable playing Omen. Again, another one of these old Omen players remembered all of these little spots that you can take your Shrouded Step to and get these little like rat angles. To be perfectly honest with you, I have an asterisk in my head where I'm kind of questioning and want to go back and look at in maybe a few weeks down the line, is how many of those angles are going to start to be like very frequently checked. Because another example of that was in the XSET versus LG game. We saw Omen kind of take this very sort of rat angle just on the inside of the inside of the B side as you push in from garage, and it's angles that that teams are not necessarily used to checking at the moment because Omen just hasn't really been available. The only sort of verticality you typically look for these days is Jet. I'm wondering how long it's sort of going to take for these once again to be very clearly on the radar of these teams. You know, in the same way that, let's say, Ascent, again, for an example, if you're pushing into A main, there is those, that the wall that sometimes you're going to see like a Jet play off of and try and hold the high angle down into arches. And it almost always gets smoked off these days, which is, by the way, another thing that is not as easy to do now with the Astra changes, because you commit a smoke to that spot and then suddenly you don't really have them available a little bit later. And so it allows for a slightly more aggressive defensive hold on the A site using an Omen, and especially better access potentially to the orb that is there on A. So I do wonder how long it will take before those things start to get like really read into. I think also when you consider things like, just with the Haven example, having something like a paranoia available to support like a B site plant or a B site post plant is really good, just because of the space that it holds. It kind of, you can sort of compare it to like breach utility in a way, like kind of sending in a fault line or a rolling thunder. It takes like a decent amount of area. You're gonna stun out, or in this case flash out, a number of your opponents, rather than needing to get a flash in like a specific corner. If you're thinking of something like a pop flash from a KO or a sky flash, where you actually have to have it land in a very specific place to get what it is you want out of it, which is a little bit harder in those tight little spaces. XSET versus Luminosity was a very interesting one for me when we look at Split, the Split map that they played, because XSET really lent into the kind of not really changing anything as far as composition goes. They brought both Astra and Viper. Meanwhile, Luminosity seemed to bring something a little bit different. They brought the Omen, Sage, and Cypher, which, I'll be honest, going into that game, I was like, oh, hell yeah, this is such a cool composition. I mean, Sage is not uncommon on Split, and to be fair, neither really is Cypher. But the thing that I liked about it is that you know, Omen's going to be bringing the smokes, and for argument's sake, they are superior smokes to Astra's right now, but you still have the ability to cut off a lot of lines of sight, because you've got the wall from the Sage that can be used sort of in lieu of where you might have a wall from a Viper. It's not quite the same, but it provides some of that. And then with the Cypher being brought as your primary sentinel, he essentially has smokes in a way. You know, he's got his cages. He also has a ton of information gathering utility. So the loss of the number of smokes that you have available to you actually isn't really there. And it almost feels like you combine those three agents together and you are making up for a decent amount of what you have lost by not having an Astra and a Viper. Obviously, you don't get like the gravity wells available to you. You don't have a cosmic divide or a Viper's Pit, which are very, very major space controlling ultimates. you sort of have like one option for a molly in the form of the slow orb. It's not quite the same because it's not going to deal damage, but I thought it was quite a creative and smart way of trying to make up for the losses of some of that utility from the meta that we're used to. However, even though Xset did bring the same composition that we would have maybe expected in recent times, they played it very differently. And I really liked the way that they changed how they played it. So instead of having a lot of defensive focus on the sites themselves, they had a really strong mid defense. You would almost always see the Viper's Wall be used in mid. Sometimes the Poison Cloud would be there with it as well. And it made it so difficult for LG to actually be able to push up through mid. Like, they would have to expend so much utility in mid to even try and get any control of that space. And on split, I think mid is a very important area to have control of because, especially if you want to be rotating between the sites, you really want to have male and vents available to you. Otherwise, you've got to full commit. There's just no easy way of doing that because of how long like the attacker spawn is, or even like sewer. It's a really difficult place to push through if you don't have mid control. And you know, if you're trying to push just from the lobby of either side, whether you're pushing from garage or pushing from A lobby trying to go via ramps, like, not having mid control is gonna mean that the defenders have pretty safe control of either of the two heavens, which directly overlook the site and make it incredibly difficult to plant if you don't have that yourself as an attacker. So the way that Xset actually had that mid control was great, and it drew so much util out of Luminosity. We did see there be quite a lot of focus over on ramps as well for when they were making A-site pushes. So when LG were the ones who were attacking, oftentimes that's where you would see the Sage Wall be expended. For example, they specifically just want to cut off that area, so they didn't need to, I don't want to say didn't need to worry about heaven as much. That's not necessarily the right way to put it, but just to sort of streamline their approach. But on the side of Xset, that's also where we would see Viper's Walls be used sometimes. So they were definitely different walls to what we're used to seeing in the meta that's just kind of passed, or the patch that's just passed, I should say, as the meta is still very much in transition. And that's what I really liked about it, is it wasn't just this stubbornness to just refuse to change. It was like, well, okay, we're going to play these same agents, but we're going to play them slightly differently. And I thought it was very effective. I do want to point out, though, that Tig had some really good plays on Omen. I already mentioned the little kind of sneaky spot that he held on the B site, but also there was a great round where they were doing a post plant on the A site, and he would send in a paranoia down into elbow and then teleport to be behind the two defenders or attackers, sorry, who were in elbow, and then be able to sandwich them and actually get a pincer there with another one of his teammates who was up in heaven. So there are really nice little bits of like Omen tech that were used in that map. But I think that Xset were very prepared in the way that they decided to use Astra and Viper. That said, I don't know if that means that it's going to be something that lasts or something that they're going to continue to bring back. I'm not entirely sure about that. But for this game, at least, I think it was really cool. And you also have to consider, like, there was a little bit more firepower in the sense that they brought a chamber as well, and actually, like, having such a strong mid presence meant that chamber could be such a strong anchor of sorts in like A heaven, for example, or something like that. So there was definitely a lot of thought that was put into what they decided to do, and actually I really enjoyed that map for that reason. It subverted my expectations, I think, when I was just looking at the agent select blindly at the start. The other game that I wanted to talk about was Sentinels versus V1, and this was another one that we did a co-stream for on my channel, and I think a lot of people were really rooting for Sentinels, and to be perfectly honest with you, I thought that this was going to be like a patch change, a meta change that was going to massively suit Sentinels' strengths. One of the biggest problems that Sentinels have had in recent months has been this struggle with site setup. You know, not only do they not really do it, but also the way they like to play by just sort of being fluid and acting on the fly isn't great against like a defense that has a really good site setup. Going against things like Astras and Vipers is very hard to break into if you're not doing the same thing. Like, it's a very meticulous process, the way that the most recent meta has worked, and it's not really been Sentinel's way of doing things. So the idea that that may change and that we can expect a faster style of gameplay because there's kind of less site setup as much of an option, and it's more likely to just be like adapt, work on the fly, just make sure you have the utility to use to your advantage when the time comes. Oh my god, I was here like, hell yeah, this is Sentinels. Probably not going to have like just a straight up boomer comeback, but they're going to feel more comfortable. That, I mean, it just didn't go that well for them versus version 1. Did it? You know, I will say no one on V1 played badly. Like, we got to the end of that Haven map and I turned to my Twitch chat and I was like, no one on that team played badly. Absolutely no one on that team played badly. They all played incredibly. I mean, the way that Breach was being played by Ethies was just constantly like catching Sentinels out over and over. Sentinels would use things like a lockdown and they would use them in a position which they thought was safe, and then suddenly an aftershocks coming through. The aftershocks down from heaven as well to clear out hell. The aftershocks were just such a big part of V1 doing really well in that map. So Ethies on Breach, excellent. But also like Whippy on Chamber. Oh my god, Whippy on Chamber was fantastic, especially playing on the A site and being able to hold down that space. Like, there just seemed to be nothing going wrong for V1 in that map, and it was clear that Tens was really struggling. I think, you know, statistically he ended up being the bottom, like the lowest ranked player in that entire you know, map, which is not something you can judge someone's entire career on or entire value, or whether they're going to suffer with this meta in the future, but it was still not like a great showing from Sentinels. And I think that like Xander had a really great time on Omen. Everyone remembers the fucking ace clutch that I like screamed my head off at. It was absolutely wild. I will say, you know, after saying that V1 played so well on Haven, I think that we did see those like glimmers of hope from Sentinels on Ascent, which was actually the map they played before Haven. And I think one thing that I noticed that Sentinels did really well, and that was probably kind of abetted by this sort of new way of playing, this new meta, was the being able to have like a constant stream of utility that they could use into holding somewhere. So interestingly, the example I'm going to give is a similar one to what I mentioned a little bit earlier, a space that's very important. That is the A Heaven space. Now for Cloud9, the way that they would do it is like the constant dark colors and combine that with the Killjoy or KJ mollies. But in the instance of Sentinels, it was just kind of like constant stream of utility. It's like this thing goes in, once that's down, we've got another thing, and it was the constant holding back. And it actually reminded me quite a bit of what I thought that Ascend did quite well against G2 in their game that they played last week. I think on the same map, actually. Yeah, it must have been on Ascent. It was, you know, setting up for the A site, like they just had a constant stream of utility that could be used into that space to hold back the defenders. And I felt that that's something that Sentinels were doing quite well on that map. It just wasn't quite enough. So obviously we're still in the early days of what is going on here. The playoffs are coming up, and I would imagine that there are a lot of teams who have been scrimming certain ideas. I really hope we see more creativity, kind of like what we had with in the XZ LG game. Like, I thought that was a great example. And And yeah, I would imagine that there's a lot more development going on. I think that these teams who have sort of veteran Omen players are probably gonna find they have a pretty good time. You know, I didn't even mention the fact that like Vanity with his freaking one-way dark covers, making it very hard to push places like Tree and like A main on Ascent, you know? Like, all of these little pieces of tech that were used in the past and we haven't seen for quite a while, and you've had these ex-specialists of Omen being able to come back into that fray, I think is really interesting and really excellent for them. But of course, it's something that's going to be cleaned up, and we are likely to see more depth be added to it. I will be interested to see if some of these teams that did decide that they still wanted to play Astra are gonna make the switch now in playoffs, or if they're gonna wait until after playoffs. Like, where is the risk reward kind of balance there? I think that's a big question that I have. I also just want to see a little bit more Brimstone. Like, you know, I mentioned that Brim was played on that one map, or that one Haven map, but I don't think that it was the right choice in that instance. But like, give me some bind, bruh. Like, which, you know, we don't see a ton of in NA compared to EU, I don't think. But either way, like, that's where my eyes are going forward. I really wish I'd had a chance to pay attention to way more of what was going on this weekend, but unfortunately, I literally felt like actual shit. I'm glad I got to go and go back and see some of the Cloud9 guard game, though, because like, seeing all of social media blow up about that and me being there, like, the one game that I couldn't watch, you know? So either way, I'm really curious to know what any of your thoughts are about this kind of, you know, blooming meta. Is it not gonna stay as like the super strong Omen thing? Like, how do you think it's gonna develop? Let me know. I'm really curious on your thoughts. Also, I just want to mention before I go that I have opened up a Patreon. There are 3 different tiers that you can go for, and only one of them is more expensive than a Twitch sub, and not very much. I'm never going to make it expensive. The cheapest tier I have is £1 a month, which would be $1.50 for if you're in the US. I just want it to be an opportunity for people, if they feel so inclined, to give very small financial support to do so and get a little bit in return from me. So do check that out if you're interested. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week for the next episode of Bombshell, and whatever it is I do between now and then. All right, goodbye. Welcome to the playground, follow me. Tell me your nightmares and fantasies. Sink into the wasteland underneath. Stay for the night, I'll sell you a dream. Let's make some content!